cell layer and the inner plexiform layer. These three together constitutes the ganglion cell complex. The glaucoma is characterized by selective loss of these retinal ganglion cells. On SD-OCT or spectral domain OCT, thickness of the macular ganglion cell, which extends usually from the internal limiting membrane to the inner nuclear layer, including the ganglion cell layer, and provides a unique analysis of these percentage of loss of these retinal ganglion cells. As we know, the macular region contains more than 50% of these all ganglion cells. So thus assessing the ganglion cell complex in the macular region may be useful in glaucoma as an adjunct to other tests. The literature shows that ganglion cell analysis significantly correlates with the visual field damage. The purpose of our study was to compare the macular ganglion cell complex with the peripapillary retinal nerve fiber layer thickness in glaucoma suspects as well as in glaucoma patients. It was a prospective observational study of 20 glaucoma suspects and 20 glaucoma patients. The glaucoma the glaucoma patients had a typical cup disc ratio of more than 0.5 or the asymmetry of 0.2, more than 0.2. The glaucoma patients had a mean, the glaucoma suspects had a cup disc ratio of more than 0.5 as asymmetry of more than 0.2. Glaucoma patients had a glaucomatous optic neuropathy, classical glaucomatous optic neuropathy. All eyes underwent applanation tonometry, dark room gonioscopy, the optic disc photography, RNFL analysis, and all these OCT analysis was done using an RTView OCT machine. The standard automated perimetry was done with the help of an octopus using a 24-2 program. The OCT measurements were done, RNFL was done using a NHM4 mode as shown in the picture on the right side, and the disc was done in the same mode. For the GCC, we used a protocol, MM7 protocol, which included a single horizontal scan and a multiple vertical scan with the 15 with a 0.5 mm interval between them. As I showed told before, GCC was measured between ILM to the IPL. We assessed both focal loss volume as well as the global loss volume in all the patients. On the OCT, any signal strength more than 35 at the word misalignment of was excluded from the analysis. The statistical analysis was done using the SPSS software. Our results showed that the mean age of the participants was 50.69 plus or minus 15 years. The range was 20 to 77 years in glaucoma suspects. Both the groups, the age was comparable. There was no difference in the optic disc area or vertical cup disc ratio between the two groups. There was a statistical significant difference in the average RNFL thickness, superior RNFL thickness and inferior RNFL thickness and average GCC between the glaucoma suspects and the glaucoma patients. GCC thickness showed a strong correlation with the RNFL thickness, which was statistically significant. Although glaucoma is clinically defined as optic disc cupping with a corresponding visual defect, underlying disease process is glaucoma is basically a retinal ganglion cell loss. Previous studies have shown that the addition of ganglion cell complex data to the RNFL increases the detection of glaucoma in a perimetric group from 78 to 87%, in a pre-perimetric from 45 to 56%. Previous studies have shown also that the GCC average measured by SD-OCT is significantly better in diagnosing glaucoma in a perimetric group compared to the macular retinal thickness average. The diagnostic power of ganglion cell complex average was also higher than that of the macular mean retinal thickness in the discrimination between the pre-perimetric group and the normal eyes, but was not statistically significant. One more significant thing is Tano et al. Study has shown that DCC detected an additional 9% of the perimetric glaucoma cases and 11% of the pre-perimetric glaucoma cases that were not detected by nerve fiber layer analysis. In our study, 38% of eyes had an abnormal ganglion cell complex and 13% had an abnormal RNFL in the glaucoma suspect group. 98% had an abnormal GCC and 90% had an abnormal RNFL in the glaucoma group. The reliability of GCC increases in the glaucoma group than in the suspects or the pre-perimetric group. Our results shows that the GCC imaging can detect glaucoma cases in some of the cases where the RNFL can still be a normal. And GCC analysis shows a more extensive and severe damage compared to the RNFL as shown in this pictorial thing. So in conclusion, the further prospective studies are to be required before such a definitive conclusion can be drawn. Ours is a small sample size and we did not compare the two groups with the normal group. The ability to diagnose glaucoma with a macular GCC thickness was comparable with the RNFL thickness. So thus the macular GCC thickness measurement is a good alternative or a complementary measurement to RNFL measurement and the visual field test in the evaluation and management of glaucoma. Thank you.
Very good presentation. The only problem is that all these tests are not very standardized. We need to have normal data to compare to. So if the normal data is still lacking, and I know that RTPU is working very hard on it, and especially somebody has to do normal data in the Indian eyes, because it's definitely, I mean, we will say that it should be analyzed in females, males, and in different regional areas. So we always compare to the normal white population, which is not correct for the Indian population.
I'd just like to make a comment on this paper. Maybe we're making things too simplistic by just looking at the ganglion cell layer and the retinal nerve fiber layer, but not taking into account, the demographic parameters, creating correlations, doing multivariate analysis, and actually then proving and saying that maybe the ganglion cell layer is more important in glaucoma.
Yeah.
So those are things that should be actually part of the presentation of any.
As rightly commented, the main problem here is a normative database. So we don't have to say that it's conclusively one thing. The other thing is these are all complementary to each other. So we cannot say that this is the test to say that to diagnose a glaucoma. Probably you can use it as an adjuvant rather than a diagnostic test for the glaucoma.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay, so we'll call it today. Thank you all very much. And
coming closer to home, POVG patients are estimated to be around 6.48 million in India, and PACD, that is the combination of PACG and the PAC patients, is around 6.6 million. However, there's a big but. There are an additional 21 million primary angle closure suspects for whom the need for treatment is controversial. With these data in mind, certain questions come to the surface. Number one, what is the percentage of occludable angles which will progress to PACG? Two, the time frame over which the progression will occur. Factors which predict the progression. Three, and four, risk of blindness from such progression. So we wanted to do an ASOCD-based study to report the progression of primary angle closure suspects to PAC and PACG over a 3-year follow-up period. It was a prospective, non-randomized, observational case series studies. 264 eyes of 132 patients of PACS were consecutively recruited and followed up. Number of investigations, including anterior segment OCT, was done. The ASOCT images before and after the LPI were reviewed and analyzed. These patients were then followed up post-PI at 1 week, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years. Now, as we followed these patients up, I'll just share with you 2 examples. This particular case, you can see that there is a clearly patent PI. Initially, this was a patient of PACS. We started following the patient up, and you can clearly see the development of a PAS, which does not even require a gonioscopy, but it was evident on slit lamp evaluation. And the anterior segment parameters started to decrease. This is the second case where you can see the clearly patent PI. This was a patient of PACS initially, as were all the others, and over the follow-up period, this patient developed PAS in all 4 quadrants, as is evident from the gonioscopy images. And the ASOCD parameters also started to show a decline. Thus, we developed a cohort of patients who were showing a deterioration in spite of the PI. So we analyzed these patients, and the results revealed that overall, that is 264 patients taken together, there was a dip in the intraocular pressure. And there was an improvement in the ACD and the sclerals per angle overall. That is, if we take all the patients together, there was an improvement. ASOCT, values of AOD, TISA, ARA all showed a statistically significant improvement. But again, I repeat, this is overall. So, we come back to these patients who were progressing despite the presence of a patent PI. Now, for these patients, which was a small cohort of 42, what we observed was that the intraocular pressure started to show an increase. The ACD and the sclerals per angle all were showing a decrease, and the ASOCT parameters, AOD, TISA, ARA, all were showing a decline. And this was statistically highly significant. So, at midterm follow-up, we had around 36 patients who had progressed to PAC, that's 13%, and 6 of them had progressed to PACG. At final follow-up, 26 of them were in the PAC category, and 16 of them had progressed to PACG. Coming to the discussion, in population-based studies done in India, there have been reported progression of PACS to PAC and subsequently to PACG. Thomas et al. Reported a 5-year incidence of progression of PACS to PAC to be 22%. The same authors published a progression of PACS to PACG to be 28.5%. Dr. Ramani et al. Published a study showing that even after an LPI, there was a progression of 28% in the patients of PACS who progressed to PAC. Dr. Siota in her study showed that there was a progression of PACS to PAC in 22%, PAC to PAC OHT in 38.7%, and PAC OHT to PACG 30.7% over 5 years. However, Dr. Pandav reported a smaller percentage of progression of only 9.3% in PAC patients. However, these patients had been subjected to an LPI. So he suggested that LPI appears to alter the natural course of angle closure. We noted a progression in 42 eyes, that is 15.9%, who progressed to PAC, 26 synechial, 16 appositional. Of these 16, that is 6.1%, went on to develop PACG, with a relative risk of progression of 24. Thus, patients of PHCS should be followed up very closely even after an LPI, as some of them have a tendency to progress. Patients who report symptoms like blurred vision, halos, eye pain, headache, etc. should be followed up more closely, as well as older patients and hyperopes. Proper slit lamp evaluation must be done at every visit. Central and peripheral anterior chamber depth to be noted. Anterior chamber inflammation, which could be suggestive of recent or acute attack, to be noted. Any iris abnormalities like focal atrophy or posterior synechia to be noted. Abnormal pupillary reaction to be noted, and any lens changes should be noted. IOP and gonioscopy to be done at every visit, and ASOCT may serve as a very important tool to monitor these patients. After iridotomy, the ASOCT to be repeated periodically. Patients who show a decrease in the parameters of AOD, ARA, TISA, etc. should be flagged and followed up very, very closely. Thus, LPI is not the end point in patients with PACS. A few of them have a tendency to progress. Identifying and monitoring these patients is a big challenge, and ASOCT could be of great help in these cases. In conclusion, this hospital-based study reported a progression of 15.9% and a progression to PACG of 6.1%. Thus, high-risk PACS patients should be followed up very, very closely even after an LPI. Thank you. Oh, eyes.
What percentage?
Percentage of around 30% dropped off.
1/3 of the patients.
1/3 of it, yeah.
What could have happened to them? So you don't know.
That's
one. Second is, why do you think the ASOCT is more important than gonioscopy? What exactly the ASOCT does for you here?
It's not actually, because gonioscopy is very subjective. There are different people doing it. This can be quantified.
Answer my
It can
question
be
around. What do you think is the advantage of ASOCT over gonio in this situation?
in these particular cases. It's just the quantification and the follow-up becomes easier, because like gonioscopy to be done by different people at different visits might not be very comparable. Whereas ASOCT, the same technician doing the same particular test over and over again, it could be more comparable. That is all.
The gonioscopy will give you each and every part of the angle which you might miss with
Absolutely,
ASOCT.
absolutely.
In ASOCT, you are taking only one or two
Absolutely.
or three segments.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So gonioscopy still is a standard.
Absolutely,
tool.
no, absolutely, no doubt.
PAS is not a subjective feeling. Everyone knows what is PAS. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Differently was we just measured the lens thickness to the anterior chamber depth ratio. We found that the lens appeared not to be a factor for progression. So there was something else, so we branded them as PAC and we just followed them up and eventually subsequent treatment.
RNA risk, I mean, anything that is identified and which would
Not really, sir, not really. Not really. No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Union of wounds and release of some cytokines has been found to prevent fibroblast reaction. So it has all factors for a good autogenous ceton implant. So we planned a study in which we studied the surgical outcome of EchoTrack with subscleral anti-lens capsule implantation. 40 eyes were studied. It was a prospective randomized study wherein 20 eyes underwent only a EchoTrack and 20 eyes underwent EchoTrack with subscleral anti-lens implantation, and all the patients are followed up for a period of 9 months. And we included patients with primary open-angle glaucoma with a significant cataract with intraocular pressure of 21 millimeters or more, despite maximum tolerable medications. We excluded patients with narrow-angle glaucoma, secondary glaucomas, poorly dilating pupils, or history of prior laser or ocular surgery. And all the patients underwent best corrected visual acuity assessment, a slit lamp microscopy examination, intraocular pressure gonioscopy, fundus evaluation, and fields and OCT to confirm the diagnosis. And the short video showing the surgical steps. We did a conventional single-site phacotrap wherein ALC was stained with trypan blue. A continuous terminal capsular access was done. The capsule was reserved in the ringal-acted solution, and after the sclerostomy and iridectomy, the the ALC was placed in the subscleral space and in the sclerostomy, and it was anchored with the 10-0 monofilament nylon. And post-operatively, all the patients were prescribed steroid antibiotic combinations with the cycloplegics, and they were regularly followed up every week and every month for 9 months. And at each visit, visual acuity assessment was done, slit lamp examination was done, bleb status was recorded, intraocular pressure fundus examination was done, and complications were noted. And blebs were classified as either a polycystic functional bleb, diffuse functional bleb, flat non-functioning bleb, or a tenile cyst. And surgical outcome was classified as a complete success where the intraocular pressure was 21 millimeters of mercury without any post-op anti-glaucoma medications. Qualified success if it was less than 21 millimeters of mercury with anti-glaucoma medications, or surgical failure was pressures of more than 21 millimeters of mercury patient showed signs of progression. Our results, we found that the age group and pre-op intraocular pressures were comparable in both the groups, and post-op drop in intraocular pressure was more marked in group 1, that is 48.3% as compared to 29%, but we found that we required anti-glaucoma medications post-operatively in the group 1 as compared to the ALC group. It was 1.6 initially, which dropped to 0.6 in group 1, but it was only 1.42 in group 2, which they don't require any post-op medications. And we found that there was improvement in visual acuity in both the groups, and complete success was achieved in all the eyes in group 2, and 11 eyes in group 1, and 9 eyes required additional medications. We had 2 patients who had complications like choroidal tunnel and shallow AC, and this line graph depicts the change in intraocular pressure in both the groups. We found that we had type 2 blebs in the study group, and we had type 2, 3 and 4 blebs in the control group. This UV image shows low echogenic sclerostomy opening patent post-operatively, and a bleb, subscleral bleb space patent, and a high echogenic anti-lens capsule placed in the subscleral space post-operatively. And the blebs, as you see, are diffuse in the study group as compared to a raised avascular bleb in the ALC group. And we are able to see the bluish tinge of the ALC post-operatively. And at 1 year when EBM was done, there was still a patent sclerostomy and a subconjunctival space seen in patients who had undergone ALC. 2 of our patients had complications like choroidal detachment and shallow chamber. And Emra et al. And Liu et al. Have also conducted a similar study where they have compared the phacotrap with ALC with phacotrap with mitomycin C. Their patients also showed similar fall in intraocular pressure as seen in our group. And none of our patients in the ALC group showed any post-op complications, and none of them required any post-op anti-glaucoma medications. The post-op reaction was similar in the study group as well as in the control group. So I'd like to say that ALC seems to be having a promising role, and as it has shown a very good short-term success rate at no additional cost because it's derived from the patient's tissue, and it has a very low risk of any bacterial contamination, infection or rejection. Thank you. Surgeon as well as the person following up, we didn't know which patient had received ALC and which was a conventional single-site phacotrap.
The other group never received any antimetabolites?
No, madam.
Growing day by day. The transient and permanent elevation of intraocular pressures is a common complication reported next only to the incidence of cataract and post-vitrectomy. Up to 80% of these cases can be managed by medical therapy, but the challenge is in those which are refractory to medical management. Traditional filtration surgeries have been reported to have poor outcomes in this situation. We did a retrospective chart review of 49 eyes of 49 patients who developed refractory secondary glaucoma following pars plana vitrectomy and underwent an AGV implantation either as a primary procedure or secondary to a failed filtration procedure between January 2002 and July 2012. A minimum of 6 months follow-up of patients was required for inclusion in the study. Data collection was done for the demographic profile, indications of vitrectomy, lens status, silicone oil and scleral buccal use, prior filtration surgery, placement of the tube, intraocular pressure, visual acuity, number of drugs and complications. Primary outcome measures at 6 months was taken as the IOP and defined as a complete success if we could achieve a control of IOP without the need of any medication. Qualified success if it was achieved with 1 or 2 medication, and a controlled IOP with 3 or more medication or an uncontrolled IOP was considered a failure. Secondary visual outcomes were measured with visual acuity, number of anti-glaucoma medications, total number of complications and additional surgical procedures. Informed consent and institutional ethics committee approval was taken. Coming on to the results, a total of 49 eyes, of which 39 were male and 10 female. The average age was 32.22 plus minus 16.95 with a range of 9 years to 68 years. The recent indications for vitrectomy, a majority were trauma-related complications followed by rhegmatogenous retinal detachments and end-of cases. 80% of the cases were taken up for a primary AGV and around 20% were following a failed glaucoma filtration surgery. Majority, that is 53%, were aphakic after the vitrectomy at the time of AGV implantation. The tube was placed in the anterior chamber in 37 of the 49 eyes and in the pars plana in 10 of the eyes. The mean intraocular pressure, as we can see, showed a significant 5 pre-operatively to about 1.5 at 6 months of follow-up. The primary outcome, 25% achieved a complete success, while 26 eyes achieved a qualified success. Thus, IOP was controlled in 78% of the patients on 2 medications only. Major complications reported in 19 eyes were mainly tube retraction of fibrous capsule, both of which needed brief surgeries. Other major complications like endophthalmitis was found in only 1 eye. Additional procedures were capsule excision, tube repositioning and tube flushing, each for the various complications. Aphakia was seen to be noted with a higher failure rate in these cases, so was the age of less than 25 years, so younger patients. So we concluded that Ahmed glaucoma valve is effective in controlling IOP in post-vitrectomy glaucoma, which tends to be refractory to medical management. Our study reported an overall success rate of 78%. Thus, we recommend glaucoma drainage devices as the first line of management after medical therapy has failed in such cases. Complications are mostly non-vision threatening and manageable. Most common complications are of tube retraction and fibrous capsule formation, which required resurgery in about 8% of the patients. Trauma-related pathology, higher pre-op IOP, aphakic status, and younger age are indicators of poor outcome in such patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Simharanjan, and it was a nice presentation. And I think we all agreed upon the use of Ahmed glaucoma valve in refractory glaucomas, particularly in post-vitrectomized eyes, and a very nice paper. I think the IOP outcomes were similar.
Our IOP outcomes were similar.
That is on. How do you explain the increase in visual acuity with the use of the tube?
So that could be probably because in a long term the pressure was stabilized, and pre-operatively most of the pressures were in the range of 30 to 40. So
you attribute the visual outcomes to the intraocular pressure or any other factor?
So to the corneal status, due to better corneal status, due to the better control of IOP.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We now invite the next speaker to present his paper on amniotic membrane as an adjuvant in MMC modulated TRAM. Dr. Kirti Jaisingh. She's not here. What's your age?
Vitrectomy for primary glaucoma. We have no financial interests. Amniotic membrane is a biological bandage as a scaffold, and it has anti-inflammatory, anti-scarring properties that we all know. Trabeculectomy with the use of amniotic membrane for uncontrolled glaucoma has been reported in previous literature, but for secondary glaucomas. The aim of our study was to assess the role of amniotic membrane transplantation as an adjunct in primary mitomycin C augmented trabeculectomy. It was a prospective randomized controlled clinical trial. 32 adult primary glaucoma eyes were taken, and 2 groups, Group A and Group B. Group A was the study group where 16 eyes were taken, and it had amniotic membrane transplant along with mitomycin C. In Group B, mitomycin C alone was used. We used cryopreserved amnion. The inclusion criteria were age more than 35 years, intraocular pressure more than 21 millimeter mercury on more than equal to 2 topical medication, and those willing for a 6-month follow-up. We excluded secondary glaucomas and prior conjunctival procedures. Coming to the procedure, the mitomycin C 0.02% was applied before making the scleral flap. It was applied for 2 minutes and a thorough saline wash was given. And the amnion was stuck after suturing of the scleral flaps, but before the bleb suturing, it was put underneath the conjunctiva. The outcomes that we noted were first is intraocular pressure and second bleb morphology on the basis of Indiana bleb grading classification. In terms of intraocular pressure, the mean IOP was noted and the patients were graded as a complete success, qualified success or failure. Those with complete success had IOP between 6 to 16 mmHg without any anti-glaucoma medications. Qualified success, this IOP with one anti-glaucoma medication or after bleb needling with 5-fluorouracil, and failures if none of the two worked and the pressures were more than 16. In terms of bleb morphology, we use the Indiana bleb grading system, which has extent, vascularity, height and sedals. Coming to the results, the mean intraocular pressure in terms of mmHg in both groups preoperatively it was comparable. In the study group, the pre-op IOP was 43.14 plus minus 11.22 mmHg, which post-operatively was noted to be 12.06 plus minus 2.62 mmHg with a 70% drop. In group B, the pre-op IOP was 40.51 mmHg and post-operative 13.13 mmHg with a 67% drop. Both the groups had a significant drop, but the difference in the two groups was not statistically significant. It was comparable at 6 months. Coming to the qualification of success, patients with complete success were 82% in the amniotic membrane group and only 50% in the mitomycin alone group. This was statistically significant. The patients with qualified success were around 44% in group B and one failure was noted in the mitomycin group. Coming to the bleb morphology, by 6 months, most blebs were in the grading of E2, V1 and H2, that is extent 2 to 4 clock hours, with a avascular cystic blebs and a moderate height. Here we want to note that one patient in the mitomycin C group had a pale ischemic scarred bleb, which was the failure that we noted, and amniotic membrane blebs had better heights at 1 day and 3 months, but it was insignificant at 6 months, which we attribute to the presence of amnion at the bleb site. Coming to the sequential bleb appearance, if we see the amnion group, it has a normal vasculature and by the end of 3 months it has a diffuse bleb, while the mitomycin group shows corkscrewing of vessels, a little dry look of the conjunctiva and localization of the bleb. The interventions and complications, as we noted, that in the mitomycin group, a significant number had a qualified success. So needling was needed in 7 patients, whereas only 3 patients required needling in the amnion group. In the mitomycin group, we had one transient choroidal detachment which subsided on its own, and one failure that we noted was high IOPs at second post-stroke week with very shallow AC, in which the scleroscopy was blocked with the iris tissue, and internal revision was not successful. To conclude, we had a better bleb morphology at 3 months with the amnion group. The intraocular pressure control was statistically significantly better in the amnion group at 82% versus 50% of complete success in mitomycin group. Intervention in the form of 5-FU was needed in 7 patients in AMT group and was needed in 3 patients in AMT group and 7 in mitomycin, but was not statistically significant. A diffused uniform vascularity and glistening healthy conjunctiva was noted with amnion blebs, which may promise a bleb longevity. But our study was up to 6 months, so long-term results are waited. So just leaving with the final bleb appearance, in the amnion group, we had a vasculature which was normal, glistening conjunctiva and diffuse bleb, whereas the control group had a localized, irregular and dry conjunctiva.
Yeah. How long was the amniotic membrane left in place?
Sir, it was stuck at the end of the surgery. We placed it beneath the conjunctiva and put the bleb forming sutures. So it was not removed.
So it's never removed?
No, sir.
It stays there?
Yes, sir.
Any difference in patient comfort?
Sir, with mitomycin group, the blebs that we have noted were a little localized and the conjunctiva look was a little dry. Although we did not grade it on the basis of the patient's symptoms, but because of the dry conjunctiva, the patients will be a little more asymptomatic as compared.
Any reaction from the amnion?
No, sir. No reaction.
Don't you think a 50% success rate for a conventional mitomycin trial, which we all do for so many years, is a little too low? Is that the incidence of success which you get with the mitomycin trial?
So that was
That's what you found.
So because we in 44% of the patients we had a qualified success, meaning they needed intervention and then they were. But in MUN group,
complete
we
success
needed,
only 50%.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And qualified success. Thank you.
Could we invite the?
Today I am presenting a paper on the Pentacam versus IOLMaster. Are they interchangeable for the anterior chamber depth? An accurate evaluation of the anterior chamber depth is critical for the determining the risk of angle-closure glaucoma, planning of the cataract and refractive surgery, in calculation of the phakic or pseudophakic IOL power and diameter. ACD can be measured by the contact as well as the non-contact method. Non-contact method of the ACD measurement have become preferred due to their speed, relative ease of use, avoidance of topical anesthesia, and lack of corneal indentation. Variety of non-contact imaging devices are available to measure the ACD, such as IOLMaster and Pentacam. Differences in the instrumentation between IOLMaster and Pentacam may lead to measurement disparity. Every clinic may not have all instruments for the same parameter. ACD measurements with the IOLMaster and Pentacam have been demonstrated to be reproducible, but interchangeability is questionable. Having this background in our mind, aim of the study was to assess the agreement and interchangeability of the two non-contact imaging devices measuring anterior chamber depth in healthy eyes and in glaucoma patients. The study was a cross-sectional and observational study that is conducted in Glaucoma Clinic of Ratanjyoti Nethralaya Gwalior between December 12 to April 13. Participants were divided in 3 groups. In the first group is the 20 POG patients. In group 2 is the 20 primary angle closure patients, that includes the PSCS, PSC and PSEG, and group 3 includes the 20 healthy volunteers from staff of clinic patients. POG patients were defined as the untreated IOP exceeding 21 mm of mercury at different times of the day from 8 am to 6 pm, open anterior chamber angles on gonioscopy, glaucomatous optic neuropathy with thinning or notching of the neuroretinal rim, reliable glaucomatous visual field defects with glaucoma asymmetric test results outside the normal limits. Angle closure patients were defined as the ISQ classifications. Healthy volunteer subjects were recruited from within the medical staff clinic patients. All subjects had a best corrected visual acuity of 6/9 or better. The normal appearance of the optic nerve had in the both eyes. No other pathological ocular condition other than the refractive error noted. No subjects had a history of IOP elevation, never 21 mm and trauma. The visual fields of the control subjects were all normal. Normal appearance of the optic nerve head was defined as intact neuroretinal rim without the splinter hemorrhage, notching, without localized pallor, or without asymmetry of the cupping more than 0.2 between the eyes. Subjects having the trauma, history of trauma, surgery, inability to obtain ACD by the IOLMaster or Pentacam, corneal opacity, and irregular corneal surface and irregular anterior chamber depth were excluded from the study. Each subject underwent a complete slit lamp examination, IOP evaluation of the Goldman definition tonometry, diagonal variation of the IOP, gonioscopy, visual fields, central corneal thickness was measured using in Pentacam, and ACD was measured with the IOLMaster and Pentacam with 15 minutes interval in identical physical environments. ACD measures with the Pentacam and IOLMaster were compared with and without CCT correction in Pentacam reading using PRT test, interclass correlation coefficient, and coefficient of variation. ICC more than 0.8 generally considered good, and coefficient of variations measured by relative standard deviation, that is less than 10%, considered usually good. This was the demographic data of patients. When we compare the PRT test, the IOLMaster ACD with the Pentacam ACD in all the 3 groups, there is a statistically significant difference in both the groups. This was the mean CCT values of all the 3 groups. When we corrected the CCT correction in the Pentacam reading, even after the CCT correction, the difference is still statistically significant in both the groups. When we compare the mean difference and the confidence interval, there is still in both the scenarios, there is the statistically significant difference in both the scenarios, even after the CCT corrections. When we compare the interclass correlation coefficient and the relative standard deviations in both the groups before CCT correction and after the CCT correction, that not reached up to the level of the normality. When we plotted the blend element plot of the against the average against the difference, we found in most of the values in the above the 95% confidence interval, and even some values within the interval that not reaching the mean values. So, statistically significant difference in the ACT measurements and IOL master and pentacam reading in all groups. Even after CCT correction of the pentacam reading, there is still statistically significant difference in all groups. Intraclass correlation coefficient and coefficient of variation also show significant difference in both the scenario. Accurate measurement of the ACT has many applications. ACT is an indicator of angle closure glaucoma. Error in the prediction of the effective lens position may account for 20 to 40% of the total refractive predictions error, and precise ACT measurements required in phakic IOLs implantation to determine IOL power and effective lens position and to prevent endothelial cell damage. ACT measurements using IOL master were significantly higher than the pentacam values in all groups. This could be due to the fact that the IOL master quantifies the distance between the anterior corneal surface and the anterior crystalline lens, while the pentacam calculates the space between the corneal endothelium and the anterior lens surface. So IOL master measurements were also compared with the sum of the pentacam ACT and pachymetric value. So IOL master and pentacam ACT reading was significantly different in both the conditions with and without CCT correction in all groups. Link et al. And Alves et al. Also found the significant difference in their study. So to conclude, for ACT measurements, these devices should not be used interchangeably in glaucoma patients as well as in the healthy subjects. Thank you.
Okay. Two questions. So which one?
Same thing applied the other way also.
So which one is right, pentacam or IOL master?
No, basically we are not since we are not having any gold standard, so we cannot comment on this which one is better in this study as well.
Also, why is this in glaucoma? Why is it in a glaucoma?
As a glaucoma specialist, which one I should have for ACT?
As a glaucoma specialist, I personally believe that pentacam is definitely better because it gives you certain other parameters for the glaucoma point of view also.
I have a very basic question. See, I think for people who are not technology oriented or glaucoma specialists don't have the pentacam or the IOL master, don't you think there's a very simple test called the Van Herring test which was used earlier in the past and we still use it very effectively for screening? And how do your devices compare with the Van Herring?
Van Herring basically
you didn't do the study, I guess. You didn't include Van Herring in your evaluation.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My dear friends and colleagues, Dr. Mayuri and Dr. Cyrus, I am here to present my study on quality of life in the glaucoma patients, which is a very not often study. Not many studies available. I have no financial interest in the study. WHO qualities define the quality of life as patient perspective of their position in life in the context of culture and value system in which they live and in the relation to their goals, expectations, standards and concerns. We all know that glaucoma can impact the quality of life due to diagnosis itself. Whenever we diagnose, patient gets impacted by the diagnosis itself and disease-related disability and function, treatment-related side effects, financial strain, and inconvenience are other confounding factors. The present study was intended to evaluate this vision-related quality of life as well as dug into side effects. We had 100 patients of POG and OSG which are included in the study. We had the cases of bilateral or unilateral POAG or OSG with age above 18 years of age. Those cases who have reached the target IOP with topical anti-glaucoma medication. So we excluded the other confounding factors like disease which could impact the questionnaire, that for example ocular disease other than glaucoma, significant diabetic retinopathy, ARMD, previous ocular surgery, patient corticosteroid usage, or any type of secondary or angle closure glaucoma. So they were informed about the study, they were recruited, and each patient was interviewed using two questionnaires. One was National Eye Institute Visual Function 25 item questionnaire, NEI VFQ 25, which is a validated questionnaire for visual domains, and of course comparison of ophthalmic medications for tolerability, COMTOL, which is against validated questionnaire for glaucoma medications. Now VEI VFQ 25 questionnaire has 12 domains. It is general health, general vision, ocular pain, and near vision, distant vision activities, and so on and so forth. So what we found was, and there is another questionnaire about the drug side effects for glaucoma anti-medications. So these are different domains in that. So what we found out from that was most of the patients were in the age group of 60 to 70 years of age. And now this is what we came out with, general health, general vision is fairly impacted, 0 being a, worst quality of life and 100 being the best quality of life. And the major impact is on general health, general vision, then of course role difficulties, for example doing the near task, different tasks, meeting the people, recognizing the people, and social functioning, and of course driving also. So it affects all the aspects of this. And all the domains are impacted to some or more extent, but color vision to some extent, peripheral vision to some extent. Most commonly affected is shown in general health, general vision, and road difficulties. This has been shown in various studies that drivers with glaucoma indicate more difficulty in driving, difficulty in walking, yes, difficulty in reading has been shown in literature, difficulty in reading and grasping tasks due to poor spatial awareness. There is a problem of glare and adjustment to light in glaucoma patients. And reading is basically because you can't see the next letter what is there when you're reading. So this is a different spread of the drugs we use. Most often used are now prostaglandin and the beta blockers. Now one major drawback of this comment-all questionnaire is because it doesn't take into account the effects of this prostaglandin, because this has not been modified since the prostaglandins have been used. What we found is that most of the drugs, you can see they cause significant side effects in glaucoma patients, burning, redness, itchy is the, and of course highest the blurred vision and dimming of vision, trouble seeing at night, trouble reading. So these are all side effects of the drugs, and some of them may be because of the comorbidities associated with glaucoma, which are picked up with this questionnaire. And driving at night was one of the major detriments in these patients, and even driving during the day, reading newspaper, reading other than newspaper. Reading difficulties, as I told you already, are because patient is maybe having good central vision, but he is not able to follow the line only, or he is not able to see the things adjacent to the central visual field. Then, of course, it's important to assess the impact of drug-induced side effects and quality of life of patients so as to provide them with the best possible and most tolerable medication. Goal of therapy is to maximize every patient's quality of life by providing the most effective therapy. To conclude, glaucoma impacts a person's perceived difficulties and quality of life, and this relationship is important. It affects other functional domains and causes limitation of various vision-related activities. Awareness of quality of life in glaucoma patient helps in better decision-making, better understanding of patient's disability, and better rehabilitation strategies. Understanding of drug-related side effects can help us in formulating new treatment strategies like use of combination, preservative-free eye drops, and low-strength drugs. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Administered and what language was it administered to the patient?
It was in the colloquial language. To the patients who were illiterate.
Which language was that?
Punjabi.
Punjabi. And was the Punjabi version of the questionnaire validated in your patients before you administered the questionnaire?
Yes, we did some pilot study and we got it on our own.
Excellent. So what do you think is the effect of driving, especially in patients in your setup in Punjab?
Driving, as I saw that
the questionnaire I was devised for the West. So I was just asking, how did you modify that driving aspect of glaucoma?
Driving aspect, you can see that probably in one slide you can see that none of the ladies show any impact on the driving.
Absolutely, that's what I was asking.
So because not too many ladies were drivers in our study,
Exactly.
And there were about 89% patients, they didn't have any, score was 89. 100 is the best score, so our score was 89. So driving is not impacted so much. I think reading and the general health and general quality, feeling well-being. In fact, a very interesting thing came up, that when a patient is diagnosed with the glaucoma, it itself lowers the quality of life, Patient feels a sense of being sick. He is probably going to something which is, he says, he may not get cured now, I think there is a profound impact of quality of life on the diagnosis itself. So I think it's a word of caution is that you have to be very, very sure for label a patient as glaucoma patient, Because I think generally it says we call it kala moti in the colloquial language. So I think this is one disease which really impacts a patient's life. If it tells somebody is a kala moti, then probably significantly impacted.
The questionnaire was in the local languages also?
Yeah.
And any other language, like whatever patient is understanding?
Mostly a Punjabi patient, and I think a fairly literate population in Punjab.
And have you done the comparison between the urban population and...
No, we have not done that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next person, Dr. Shilpa Agarwal, to study the role of OCT
and VEP in early diagnosis of glaucoma.
Good morning, everyone. So I would like to inform that I am not a ratified member.
My paper is on favorable effect of amniotic membrane on corneal endothelium in trabeculectomy. We have no financial disclosures. As we all know, endothelium is a non-regenerative tissue and age-related endothelial cell count loss is a known fact. After trabeculectomy, up to 4% of endothelial cell count loss has been noted, more so when there is a shallow anterior chamber or corneoiritolenticular touch. And the use of mitomycin C in TRAB has been reported to have a 7 to 14% of endothelial cell count loss. This loss persists at even 12 months follow-up, as according to the literature that we have. Mitomycin C, as we all know, is a cytotoxic agent. It forms alkylating agents and obstructs DNA repair. In short term, the free radicals which are formed interact with the cell membrane lipids and then thus cause the cytotoxic effect. After application of mitomycin C, mean aqueous concentrations at 2 to 7 minutes have been noted up to 36 nanogram per milliliter with scleral bed applications and 5 nanograms per milliliter after episcleral applications. So the measures to reduce this toxicity have been lesser concentration use of 0.02% mitomycin, smaller time period for up to 1 to 2 minutes, a thorough saline wash, as we say 20 ml of saline, and adjunctive use of viscoelastics to prevent the shallowing of the chamber. The amnion, which is increasingly being used nowadays, has a favorable effect on blood health, but does it in a similar way have any effect on the endothelial cell health as well? That is the purpose of our study, which is to note the role of amniotic membrane transplant in reducing the mitomycin C-induced corneal endothelial cytotoxicity in trabeculectomy. It was a prospective randomized controlled trial. Inclusion patients included were between 35 to 75 years. Primary angle closure glaucoma eyes were taken, which were not controlled on medication and laser. We excluded secondary glaucomas and those who had undergone prior conjunctival procedures. 30 eyes were taken and divided into two groups, A and B. Group A were the control groups where mitomycin 0.02% was used for 2 minutes and a thorough wash was given. This was before making the scleral flap. In group B, which is the study group, amnion was used at the end of the procedure after the scleral flap suture. It was placed beneath the conjunctiva and then the blood forming sutures were placed. In terms of results, the mean preoperative and postoperative intraocular pressure in both groups was comparable, and the male-female ratio and laterality of the eye was comparable. Coming to the specular endothelial cell counts, the preoperative counts in the control group were 2205 cells. At day 1, a loss of 1.97% was noted. In the study group, from 2277 cells, we noted a 7.85% loss. Here I would like to say that this data, one of our patients had a shallow chamber, and that one of the patients had, because of that, we have a little skewing of the percentage. But if we see that from day 1 to 6 months, the endothelial cell count loss in the mitomycin C group is 13.25%, whereas in the amnion group it is 7.96%. So if we see the p-value which is coming at 6 months is 0.0, which is statistically significant for control group, meaning a statistically significant endothelial cell count loss has been noted, whereas in the amnion group the two values are almost comparable. So just to reiterate that in the amniotic membrane group, the cell counts were maintained from day 1 to 6 months, and in the mitomycin alone group, there has been a steady fall in the endothelial cell count loss. What could be the likely explanation for this? We went through the literature, and what we could assess was because of the hydraulic conductivity property of the amnion, which dilutes the mitomycin and spreads it over the available area. So amnion may absorb the residual MMC present at filtration site and thus prevent the gradual but continuous seepage of MMC into the anterior chamber. So we would like to conclude that a drop in endothelial cell count due to mitomycin was reduced to almost half with addition of amnion, probably by virtue of its hydraulic conductive property, leading to spread and dilution of mitomycin, thus preventing the continued seepage into the anterior chamber, leading to a protective effect, thus encouraging its simultaneous use with mitomycin C. Thank you so much.
Any post-operative, like second surgery was attempted in any of the group?
Ma'am, not within the follow-up period of 6 months.
No cataract surgery was?
No, ma'am.
And for shallow chamber, how many patients had a shallow chamber?
Ma'am, there was one patient in the amnion group which had transient shallow chamber in the first day, and that is one patient where we noted because of that we had a skewing of the percentage drop, where it was 7.85% on day 1 in the amnion group, whereas 1.97 in the mitomycin group, which was well beneath the notable range in the literature which has been reported. But if we see at 6 months, the amnion group is almost the same. From 7.85% loss at day 1, we have 7.96 at 6 months. But in the mitomycin group, from 1.97% loss, it has risen to 13.25% loss, which is statistically significant.
Any relation noted with the intraocular pressure?
Ma'am, the intraocular pressures were comparable in both the groups. They were pre-operative and post-operative. They were comparable in both the groups.
Yeah, one last query, and I think you studied only angle closure patients.
Yes, sir. We had angle closure patients.
That is one. Second is that you've chosen only 30 eyes, and
Yes,
you've randomized them
Yes,
into 2
sir.
groups.
Yes, sir.
And what do you think is the flaw in your study? What is your analysis of your own study?
So first, it is a little on the presumptive basis of the property of the amnion, because we were also thinking why we are getting such a difference, such a statistically significant difference. Then when we looked up the literature, we could find a few articles where the hydraulic conductive property of the amnion was quoted. And because we thought maybe because of that, it just spreads the mitomycin over the area and maybe absorbs it.
What I'm trying to ask is, you've done only angle closure patients and you have very small numbers. The conclusions cannot be drawn statistically from these small numbers. Second issue is that if you're doing angle closure patients and you're expecting post-op shallowing in most of your patients with trabeculectomy, you're going to have some endothelial cell loss. So don't you think that would be the significant factor rather than the use of the amnion?
Why would it be continuing over 6 months? That is because in the amnion group, I'm saying that if we see at day 1, it's 1.97 versus 7.85. For that, we have one patient because of which the skewing was there, we noted. But at 6 months, there's not much difference between the amnion.
Statistically significant.
Yeah, but in the mitomycin group, we did find a statistically significant.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Could we have the next, the previous speaker whose slides were not ready, Dr. Shilpa, right? She's going to speak on the role of OCT and VEP in early diagnosis of glaucoma. And this was the best paper for the Haryana Ophthalmic Society, and congratulations on getting the award last year.
No financial interest. Early diagnosis of glaucoma in an epicentric topic in ophthalmology. Diagnosing the glaucoma in pre-perimetric stages prevents significant visual morbidity and is of significant interest. OCT and pattern VEP have independently been assessed for their role in early diagnosis. However, to the best of our knowledge, no study has been conducted comparing the role of two modalities. So with this, with the aim of studying and comparing the role of OCT and VEP in early diagnosis of glaucoma, and to correlate the RNFL thickness on OCT and visual pathway function on VEP in patients with primary open-angle glaucoma and glaucoma suspects. 45 patients presenting to the outpatient department of our hospital were enrolled and divided into 3 groups. Group 1 included 30 eyes of 15 primary open-angle glaucoma patients. Group B included 30 eyes of 15 glaucoma suspects. And Group C included 30 eyes of 15 healthy volunteers. Primary open-angle glaucoma were patients to be those who had intraocular pressure of more than 21 millimeters of mercury without treatment, definite optic nerve head changes on fundus examination, and visual field defects characteristic of glaucoma. Glaucoma suspects were taken to be those patients who had intraocular pressure more than 21 millimeters of mercury, but without characteristic optic nerve head changes on fundus or without characteristic visual field defects. Normal controls had intraocular pressure less than 21 millimeters of mercury with normal optic discs and normal visual fields. The patients with secondary causes of glaucoma, patients with closed angles, and with optic neuritis or any diseases of the macula, retina, or visual pathway were excluded. After taking the complete history of the patient was subjected to applanation tonometry, gonioscopy, slit lamp biomicroscopy, automated perimetry, OCT, and pattern VEP. The observations were as follows. RNFL thickness as measured by OCT was significantly reduced in primary open-angle glaucoma group as compared to glaucoma suspects and normal controls. Similarly, in glaucoma suspect patients, RNFL thickness was significantly reduced as compared to controls. And pattern VEP parameters, the P100 latency in group A was 114, group B was 107, and group C was 104. When these were compared, in primary open angle glaucoma patients, the P100 latency was significantly increased as compared to the normal controls, whereas and it was significant in group B also, that is in glaucoma suspects. Whereas when the N75 P100 amplitudes were compared, they were not found to be significant when compared to the normal controls. And correlation between latency on VEP and average RNFL thickness in primary open angle glaucoma group. A negative and significant correlation was found between the RNFL thickness and latency in primary open angle glaucoma group. However, also in glaucoma suspects, the relationships were significant. The results in group C were not significant. That is, Pearson correlation coefficient was negative, but it was not statistically significant. When correlation between amplitudes and average RNFL thickness was found, the correlation was positive and it was significant only in primary open angle glaucoma patients and not in glaucoma suspects and normal controls. So, to conclude, RNFL thickness as measured by OCT is a sensitive indicator of glaucoma damage in patients in whom the visual fields show no significant damage, hence becoming an important tool in early diagnosis of glaucoma. However, pattern VEP show no change in parameters in glaucoma suspects. So, though not as helpful in early diagnosis, it is an important indicator of functional damage in glaucoma patients. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike.
So my study is on comparative differences between small incision cataract surgery combined with trabeculectomy through a single site versus two-site phacoemulsification combined with trabeculectomy in cases with coexisting cataract and glaucoma. There are no financial interests disclosed. The goal of combined surgery is to achieve adequate long-term control of intraocular pressure, to avoid any post-operative intraocular pressure spikes which are deleterious to the health of optic nerve health, and to obtain an optimal and early visual rehabilitation to improve the quality of life of the patient. The purpose of our study was to compare intraocular pressure, best-corrected visual acuity, the decrease in anti-glaucoma medication requirement, and the intraoperative and post-operative complications following the combined surgery. A brief review of methodology: 50 eyes of 50 patients undergoing either combined phaco trap or SICS trap were included in this prospective randomized study. 25 patients were randomized to each group. Group A patients underwent clear corneal temporal phacoemulsification with IOL implantation with trabeculectomy through the superior trabecular position, and 25 patients were randomized to Group B, which underwent single-site small incision cataract surgery plus IOL implantation and trabeculectomy through trabecular position. All patients underwent surgery over a span of 2 years at a medical college hospital in North India from May 2007 to 2009. Patients were followed up for a minimum of 1 year. The inclusion criteria were age more than 35 years, visually significant senile cataract, primary open angle glaucoma or primary angle closure glaucoma, poor retinal compliance, failure despite maximal medical therapy, and appreciable visual field loss and optic nerve damage independent of the IOPW. Exclusion criteria were one-eyed patients, patients not willing to give informed consent, secondary glaucomas, any associated ocular pathologies, previous history of ocular surgery or laser, patients on alpha blockers, poor endothelial cell counts, pseudoexfoliation, small pupil, and subluxated lens. Both groups were comparable in terms of gender distribution, age group, and socioeconomic status. This is the graph showing mean and standard deviation of the pre and post best-corrected visual acuity in both groups. As we can see, there is a significant increase in the visual acuity in both groups. This is the comparison of best-corrected visual acuity at the follow-ups. We can see a statistically significant higher best-corrected visual acuity in Group A at 1 week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and 2 months. Whereas at 4 and 6 months and 1 year, the visual acuity was comparable between the 2 groups. Comparison of surgically induced astigmatism. Group A showed a lesser astigmatism of 0.45 plus minus a standard deviation of 0.6, whereas Group B had almost 1 diopter of astigmatism plus minus 0.9. So 96% patients in Group A had less than 1 diopter of astigmatism as opposed to 60% in Group B. And the number of patients with significant astigmatism, surgically induced astigmatism, were higher in Group B. Most of them were with the rule astigmatism. Regarding intraocular pressure, the mean pre-op IOP was 32 in group A and 36.5 in group B, which was comparable. At all follow-ups, we can see a significant decrease post-operatively, which was comparable at all follow-up visits. Medication requirement also fell significantly. Post-operatively, 23 patients in each group required no medication at all, and the pre-operative mean in both groups was 0.08. Intraoperative complications. Group A had no intraop complications, whereas Group B had one case each of PC rent and ZD. The post-operative complications, most common complications seen was fibrinous reaction in the AC, which was seen in 16% of patients, significantly high in Group B. Corneal edema was seen in 10% of patients, 4 were in Group B and 1 in Group A. Shallow AC and hypertonic were the other complications seen. No cases of choroidal detachment or vision surgery were seen in our group. The statistically significant difference at 2-week, 4-week and 2 months in the best-corrected visual acuity suggests a better visual outcome in Group A and early visual stabilization. Also, BCVA later on was comparable at 4 months, 6 months and 1 year. Complications were lesser in Group A, and phaco group may have a faster recovery because of the smaller incision involved with causing less inflammation and less surgically induced astigmatism. The limitations of our study was small patient group and limited follow-up. To conclude, both groups had significant and comparable improvement in visual acuity, fall in IOP and decrease in the medication requirement. And Group A had, that is the phaco-trap group, had earlier visual stabilization, less post-operative astigmatism, whereas the perioperative complications were more in Group B.